Hello everyone, it's Lindsay, and today I'm back with another Bible journaling process for you guys. I'm continuing to work through the current devotional kit from Open Journey. This is Living Stones. I do have a detailed unboxing of this kit here on my channel. If you want to check that out, it will be linked down below. I have been doing process videos every week and then word study Wednesdays every week for the last couple weeks. So there's already quite a bit of content as I continue to work through this devotional. And the way I'm tackling it for you guys is I'm kind of diving in and doing some study notes on the scripture that Ingrid has included for us. But I'm not going too deep into what she's sharing in the devotional because I want you to read it and experiment and experience it. I don't want to give that away. I want you guys to enjoy that. So there's much more in the devotional than what I'm even sharing with you guys in my study. Ingrid really kind of pulls out some different things and looks at things a little bit differently. And so I'm trying to kind of take a different approach to it to bring in some more study notes for you guys. That way to just kind of round it all out and you get a lot more out of the study. Hopefully that's the plan. So there will be a process video, art process. So that will be later on in this video. I'll have the timestamp linked down below for you guys if you want to just fast forward on to that spot there. But for today's video, we're looking at the third section of Living Stones. This is titled Rock Cairns and Memorials. So many of you, when you saw this, may have thought stones of remembrance. And so, yes, we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But she, again, like I said, Ingrid really pulls out some amazing things with word study and just her own connections. And I love getting to see that. But the first verse that she has us looking at is Exodus 20:25. My version, I use the NASB translation, is a little bit different than the translation she uses. It says, if you make an altar of stone for me, you shall not build it of cut stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you will profane it. And so the context of this verse here is that Moses has come back down with the 10 Commandment tablets. He's giving the 10 Commandments to the Israelites. And this is one of the things that God has as for a requirement for their sacrifices is to build an altar. But he's very specific about how that altar is to be built, that the stones must not be cut. They must just be raw stones if they are to build it out of stones. For if you wield your tool on it, you will profane it. And so there was a lot of commentary kind of about even the word study for tool and things like that. So I would really encourage you to do some word study here. Ingrid shares a really interesting look at the word altar versus altar. So ALTAR versus ALTER. Very neat connection that she makes there. So definitely check that out in the devotional. But a few of the commentaries that I looked up talking about this passage here from David Guzik, he says that our word altar, ALTAR, comes from the Latin altus, meaning high or elevated, because altars were raised to give them prominence and dignity. And in fact, further on in, I believe, Exodus 20:26, God also informs them that they aren't to have stairs going up to the altar because when walking up the stairs, they would expose their flesh. And it's about this connection between not allowing our flesh to be a part of our worship. Very, very interesting study if you want to go in and kind of read some commentaries on verses 26 of Exodus 20. So, you know, our word is just does not quite right here. And so it says that yet the Hebrew word for altar, mizbach, has the sense of a place of sacrifice or killing, coming from the Hebrew word to kill. So again, really showing the importance of doing word studies and looking at the language that the Bible was actually written in. It was written in Hebrew at this point, not in Latin. And so you can see the differences in those words. Really kind of changes the importance of that scripture and what it's talking about. David Guzik also says that if an altar were made of stone, it was possible or even likely that attention would be drawn and glory would be given to the stone carver. This is referring back to why God is telling him not to cut the stones. This is the important part about this. God at his altar wanted to share glory with no man. The beauty and attractiveness would be found only in the provision of God, not in any fleshly display. So as we're talking about worshiping, it should not be anything about us. It is about God. And so he doesn't, and there was a lot of idol worship at this time. The Israelites were really struggling with that. And so God did not want these altars to become another idol for them to worship the physical altar. They needed to be worshiping God. And so if they had, cut it, they would have had a tendency, as you can imagine, to make, elaborate stone cuttings and decorative pieces and things like that, would then give a nod to the creator of the altar, the workers of the altar, not God, who is the purpose behind the altar being built. Charles Elcott says he is content, that is, he is God, is content to forbid the shaping of the stones by an implement, that so they may not give rise to idolatry. So here's that important part about not having idolatry. So really neat to kind of look and see a lot you can pull out of that particular verse, looking at kind of the wordplay that Ingrid shares, and then looking into, you could go into a study of worship and some of the examples that were given, our commandments given to the Israelites in regards to their worship and the type of worship that they were doing. So really a lot of information, even just in a couple verses. Later on in the third section here, she also gives us Joshua 4, 21 through 24. And so the context for this is we are fast forwarding. The Israelites had been denied access to the Holy Land because of their disobedience. And shortly before this, Moses had been denied his access to the Holy Land for his disobedience. We talked about that last week in those videos. And so Moses had prepared Joshua to be the one that kind of takes his place and leads the remaining Israelites into the Holy Land. And so shortly before this passage in Joshua chapter 4, the second set of spies had already gone into the land, had been harbored by Rahab. Here is where we're seeing some of the switch over of, seeing God's faithfulness. Rahab comes to be a believer in God. And then Joshua is preparing to lead the Israelites to the Holy Land. And so he has taken them to the Jordan River. They're carrying the ark where God resides when he comes to the people. And they come to the Jordan, and as they step into the river separates so that they can walk across on dry land. And so kind of similar to what we saw with Moses and the Red Sea, we're seeing again here as Joshua leads the Israelites to the Holy Land. So that is kind of the context as we arrive at Joshua 4, verses 21 through 24. It says that he said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall inform your children, saying, Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed, that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. And so they had been instructed to build these rock memorials. Now, some of the commentary, depending on how you look at the language, it's either rocks set in like a row or rocks stacked up like these rock cairns that we see. And so it's the language is very specific. It's not just a pile of rocks. It's either stacked up in this direction or stacked up alongside each other, as we see here in this image. And so they created these memorials, to remember, to be reminded of God's faithfulness as they crossed through the Jordan. David Guzik says that we don't remember the past great works of God so that we can live in a dreamland of the past, thinking that the best days of our Christian experience are behind us. We remember them as the point of faith, so we can trust God for greater and greater works in the future because we have seen and experienced his past faithfulness. So this is just a marker to remember of God's faithfulness. Even if you're going through, we're not told to live in the past and to dwell in the past, but we can look to the past to focus on God, not ourselves, to focus on God and his faithfulness in our experiences. David Guzik also says that there was an important purpose for their children so that they would have a point of contact with God's work in the past and remember that God's work did not begin with them and their time. So remembering all the way back to God's faithfulness at the Red Sea, not just the miracle that he is performing there at the Jordan with Joshua and this generation of Israelites. And so it's to remember, both of those, not just that specific moment. There was also a purpose for the world. So they would know that there's a God in heaven who can work miracles, a God they should seek with all their heart. So it says here in verse 24 that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty. So not just, not just for them to remember, they need to proclaim to the world God's faithfulness. And I think that's why, so many of us share our testimonies and how God has been faithful in our lives, not to show anything about what we did or our strengths or anything like that, but to give glory to God, right? That's why I share what I do when I do, is to give God the glory in that and show how faithful he's been in my life. That's kind of the idea behind this here, is that as other people come to the Jordan, that's a marker there that they can see, and be reminded of God's faithfulness to the Israelites. Let's see, there was one commentary that I found that said that these stones may have been what John was referring to while baptizing in the Jordan at Bethabara. Matthew 3:9 says, "And do not assume that you can say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father.' For I tell you that God is able from these stones to raise up children for Abraham." So this may be that those very stone memorials were still there all the way in the New Testament as John is baptizing in the Jordan, and he is referring back to these memorials there, and he's referring back to the Old Testament here. So really neat to see the connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It was kind of fun to see that. So I will be making a note of that when I do my journaling. Ingrid also shares a really neat connection here. She says that another astonishing parallel I noticed is this. If we look at the word cut off in Joshua 4:7, when the waters of the Jordan are cut off, this word also appears in Daniel 9:26. The same word is used for the anointed one who will be cut off. As the waters of Jordan were cut off so they could enter the promised land, so the anointed one was going to be cut off so we can enter the heavenly promised land. Super, super neat. One of the many reasons why I love Ingrid's devotionals are those connections that she makes, especially when it comes to studying and reading the original languages. I really have to work to get those connections and depend on commentaries and things. But she just has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to, the Greek and Hebrew and being able to find those connections. And so I thought that was very, very interesting. So lots of good content in her devotional for the day. I just had a few notes that I wanted to share. So I'm going to be journaling in that passage for Joshua chapter 4. I really love the imagery of those rock memorials that we have there, but I will be doing something similar that I had done a couple weeks ago where I made the little notation on the side of the page there. So moving on to the art process. Nothing too revolutionary. I did have this large piece. Now, this was actually one of the traveler notebook sized cardstock pieces in the kit. So, you could leave it on the white sheet and just adhere it down into a traveler's notebook. But I just fussy cut the stones out of the center of it because I'm working in my interleave Bible. I've got plenty of room in here. And so this really takes up a lot of space. You could also use the printables and do, print off and scale things that way. But that's where I got this large piece here. Now for my background, you guys know I've been doing all kinds of fun things with the background, a lot of mixed media. I've been exploring and playing around with dyeing papers with distress inks. I should have a Reels video up very soon. I'm trying to perfect it before I get the video up, get the ratios and things like that for you guys. But this was just some plain white notebook paper that I dip dyed into some water and ground espresso distress ink. So all of this detail is just from the one color of ink. It just really added some amazing texture to the paper, and I don't have to worry about acidity in my Bible like I would with coffee dyeing or tea dyeing or food being in my Bible. This is acid free, and so I'm playing around with this and kind of figuring out and learning it. So you will see a Reels very soon, but that's what I had done, was just dip dyed some paper, and that is going to be my background. I am curious to see, since distress inks do react with water, as I introduce moist products on top of this, I'm not quite sure if they're going to suck up the color. We're going to find out together, but I am going to incorporate some gesso and texture paste and things like that. I pulled out a variety of stamps, of course, the new ones. I'm loving these large crosses. And then this piece here has this fun little notebook edge texture that I wanted to kind of frame in this page with. And so with that, I pulled out an older stamp set that has some more kind of textured notebook page edges. So I'll be using those for embellishment. I have a couple of stencils here from Tim Holtz of grime layering and linked squares. This is a newer one that I've gotten. And then I think I'm going to put my title on this card, again, exploring with Distress ink paper dyeing. This was with tea dye Distress ink. It did not quite come out how I wanted to, so I'm having to redo that batch, but this was just a plain white tag that I had dyed, and so we'll be using that, a couple die cuts, things like that. So let me go ahead, put you guys on fast forward, and we'll put together this journaling entry for Joshua chapter 4. Okay, so I'm going to start this the same way that I've started the most recent videos. I'm going to lay down a layer of Ranger Multimedia Matte Gel to start with, and this is going to glue down this paper that I had created. And I am loving this technique of like creating a messy background layer on a separate piece of paper and then gluing it into my Bible. I don't have to worry about like ink running into the center gutter of my Bible. I don't have to worry about bleed through. It's working for me. So I use my brayer to make sure that that's completely adhered down to the page. And then I'm going to sandwich it underneath a layer of clear gesso. Like I've stated in last videos, the matte gel medium acts like a glue, and the gesso is a little toothier, so it allows mediums to kind of grab a hold of the gesso, whereas it wouldn't be able to grab a hold of the matte gel medium if I put that over the top as well. So this is just the sandwich I've been using. It's working for me, so we're going to stick with it. So it's all good and dry, and now we're going to get rid of some of the background. Does it surprise you? This is what I do. So I have a piece of trash off to the side. I have some white acrylic gesso, and I'm using my larger Tim Holtz sprayer, picking up some of that gesso and then running it over the background. This particular gesso, I think I found at Walmart a long time ago, and it is not like super, super opaque white, especially when it's applied really thin like that. So it's just adding some texture to the background and kind of knocking back that background paper just a little bit. So here I have a Inktense pencil. I think it's in dark chocolate. These are water reactive permanent pencils. So I'm dipping it in that water to try to activate the ink that's in the pencil basically, and then scribble with it, but it's not really working. Like it's not staying wet long enough. So like I get one letter wet and then it's just dry pencil, but these are water reactive. So I'm going to use that to my benefit. I'm going to heat set the part that was already wet and then spray over it with my distress sprayer. And that water is activating the pencil and making it kind of bleed out and run around. And that's what I want. Now, these are Inktense, so they're super intense in color and they are permanent. So once they dry, they're permanent like ink. And so I thought that would work well because then the gesso on top, this right here that I'm doing, will stay white. It won't pick up that Inktense color from underneath because it's set in once it's dry. So I'm just using a palette knife to smear a thicker coating of white gesso, and you can see the difference between using your palette knife and using a brayer. This definitely gives you a more opaque look and does add some texture. The stack of rocks is very busy, so I'm trying to get as much contrast between the background and that stack of rocks. And so I'm going to be adding a lot of white to this, covering up a lot of things to try to get it so that those rocks stand out. Now I'm taking those stamp sets from Open Journey and I'm stamping them with some archival ink. I like to use archival when I'm stamping over the top of gesso. Other inks take a little bit longer to dry if they dry at all. So archival ink's the best bet for mixed media. This little piece here is kind of a cross shape. I only inked up the center and to the right, so that way I'm kind of framing in my page at this point. Now, in the end, a lot of this does get covered up, but you can see little bits and pieces of it in the background on the finished page. And again, like I mentioned before, it's just a process that I like to do the entire time I'm thinking about the study that I did while I'm building up all of these layers. So here's that grime layering stencil, and I'm using some Black Soot Distress paint, and I'm picking it up with a makeup sponge and then dabbing that through the stencil. I figured this would give me the most opaque look rather than using ink, and it is permanent once it's dry, and I just thought that this would work quick and easy. It dries pretty fast.
But then I lifted it up and I'm like, what? It kind of looks like cow spots. I don't know. I've used this stencil a million times. I love using it with texture paste and like different, browns and gold. I don't know that I've ever really used it with black. It was just a little much. So we're going to have to cover up some of that because it's just looking a little Dalmatian like at this point. So I pulled out that linked squares stencil. This is one of the newer ones from Tim Holtz, and I'm going to put some grit paste, texture paste, through this stencil. This particular texture paste kind of has a stucco finish. It's gritty, just like the name says. So I'm using that same palette knife to push that through the stencil, and this is giving me kind of that backdrop to go behind that stack of rocks. That way they kind of pop off, especially with that, speckle situation that I have going on there. I needed to block some of that off. And then I just take my palette knife and kind of smooth out the edges. That way it kind of fades and transitions into the page and you don't have any harsh lines. And then I am picking up a little bit more of the texture paste to kind of create the shape that I want on the background there. So I let that get nice and dry. And then I'm bringing in some white acrylic paint, wetting it down, and then a big floppy paintbrush to add some white splatters. Again, just kind of trying to cover up some of that black stenciling. I wanted some of that, but it wasn't what I was envisioning when I planned out this page. I guess I thought that it would be more black, like more solid, and not as broken up as it ended up. So I'm also kind of dabbing the white acrylic paint into some places. Again, just bringing in some more white. That way there's contrast between the background and those rocks. So here I have my little tag piece. This is where my title is going to go. And I actually ran these stickers. So these are the word stickers that come in the kit, and I ran them through my typewriter and added a couple words onto there. So remember and is, I'll also add always here in a minute. That way everything kind of worked together and I could build out my title. So it'll say, remember, God is faithful always, is what this will say here. So I'm just kind of staging it. I also pulled out 2 of those floral die cuts. Those are from a past Open Journey kit. I'm not sure which one because I just throw them all in a box together once I'm done with the kit. But she does have lots of digitals on the website, and so you can kind of scroll through and find the flowers. I love using her flowers and all the things. She also has a floral stamp set that you could purchase and create your own ephemera if you wanted to. So I'm pulling out some of the leftover bits from when I cut down the background, and I use that to mat behind the word remember. I'll also use it to mat behind the remember always, or the word always. And then this is that kind of torn notebook edge that I had actually cut off from the paper, and I'm ruffling that and creating a little paper ruffle on the edge of this tag. And I'll use my tiny attacher, and I'm going to actually staple this to make little like X's on there just to add a little bit more interest, and it's super quick and easy rather than running it through my sewing machine, and just adds some fun texture to what would otherwise be a fairly plain tag. So all that's stuck down. I've stamped out the word faithful, and now I'm using a micron pen to outline the stickers just to kind of pull everything together and make that title look cohesive. And then I'm going to add a little bit of color to these florals. So if you are printing your own, make sure that you're printing with a LaserJet printer if you're going to watercolor. If you're stamping, make sure you're stamping with a waterproof ink. So I've just pulled out my Prima watercolors. I'm using a mix of Prima and Daniel Smith, and I'm using a water brush. That way I get a really light kind of wash of color on there. I'm adding a little bit of like an ochre color. This is one of the Prima Tech Daniel Smith colors. It's kind of like a reddish brown, and then I'll pull in a little bit of pink and orange in there as well. I was just looking at the colors that were in the stones and kind of pulling those into these flowers just to balance out some color. That way I didn't just have, a stack of colorful rocks and then everything else kind of monochromatic. I wanted to pull those colors in over here to dress up that tag a little bit. And I'm just using a very tiny amount of water. I'm not using very much, and I'm not overworking the paper because it will start to kind of disintegrate a little bit. So those are nice and dry and stuck down, and I'm just using my white acrylic paint pen to add some dot detail to the center of those florals. just to kind of make them pop a little more there. And then I pulled some black fabric from my stash, and I'm going to use this to kind of embellish the top of the tag. It also adds some more texture to what would otherwise be pretty not textured. Even though it looks visually textured, other than the texture paste, there really isn't a lot other than, you know, these big die cut pieces. So I wanted to add just a little bit more on there. Kind of balances out that crazy background. I'm using a liquid adhesive and plenty of it to make sure everything sticks down over that grit paste. And I'll do the same thing for that stack of stones there. And then over here on the opposite side, I'll write down the other 2 verses that I had studied for this day. And then I will take one of the washi strip stickers from the kit. I like to cut them in half and just add a little block of it over here, and that's just going to kind of pull your eye to the left side of the page as well and kind of mimic what's going on the right side. And then just highlight my passage here in Joshua chapter 4, and that is going to be it for the entry today. So on the back side, you'll be able to see here no bleed through because we used all that matte gel medium gesso, used that colored paper. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those down below for me. Check out the description box for links to everything that I used. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.